Alright, bear with me, I'm going to do something a little bit different in this video. There's a good chance that I'm older than most of you watching, and because of that, I'm going to have some ridiculous stories that I need to kind of soften up so I don't get canceled. And I'm going to talk about how metal is perceived by media and the normies, the war among all metalheads, and girls, which I have to be a little bit careful about how I talk about that. And thank you to Varvis for giving me this idea. Check out his channel, you won't be disappointed. So a little history here, I was probably 11 or 12. I was listening to Guns N' Roses nonstop. I think that was the only album I was listening to for an entire year. Why that album only? I don't know, but I just kept listening to it over and over again. I go over to my buddy's house in the summer just before 8th grade. He says, I got something that's gonna make you forget about Guns N' Roses. And I'm like, no, that's not gonna happen. Impossible. He pulls out this little tape with this weird little cover, starts playing this. I could recognize it was a lot different than Guns N' Roses. Had guitars, but it sounded, I don't think I could find the words for it at the time. Probably dark is all I could describe it as. Whereas Guns N' Roses is kind of exciting, a little bit party music. This was a little bit more, I don't want to say sad, but kind of down, dark sounding, and I really liked it. And he was right. I stopped listening to Guns N' Roses. I listened to Black Sabbath, this album, over and over again for a whole year. You'd think at that point I would say like, hey, I wonder if there's any other albums by this band, and go check them out, but no, I don't know what I was thinking. Just kept listening to the same album over and over again. I go back to his house next summer, just before going into high school. He says, hey, I got something that's going to make you forget about Black Sabbath. Nope, that's impossible. Black Sabbath is the best. And then he plays this. And again, I never heard anything like this. I was intrigued. And then this punched in. And when I heard these guitars, it triggered something in my DNA. It was like seeing a naked woman for the first time. And the feeling was really similar because I was thinking like, if I get caught with this by an adult, I'm gonna get in trouble. This is kind of dangerous. I'm not supposed to be doing this. But at the same time, I could not help myself. I wanted more. From that point on, I just listened to Metallica for, I don't know if it was a whole year or not. Then I started discovering other bands, and the rest is history. But what you guys probably don't know is how the media and other people, meaning people who did not listen to metal, perceived it back then. This may sound really funny to you for those who were not around back then, but the media really could not get a grasp on what heavy metal was. And what I mean by that, let's say there was, they knew this heavy metal was a thing, it was very popular, so they tried to, put a band into a movie that would appeal to people like me. They'd probably hire some studio musicians and they'd play their heavy metal song, and it was something like hard rock or glam. And then I'd have a family member that I'd meet at a family gathering and say like, oh, I heard you're into heavy metal. Do you know in that movie over there, they play some heavy metal in that movie? And the band would sound like, I don't know, Aerosmith or Poison or something like that. And that really frustrated me back then. Like I would say, you can't tell the difference between what I'm listening to versus what they're playing. I know some gatekeeper energy here. I was 13 or 14. I will say though, I think there was an old news program called 2020. They did a special on the dangers of metal. And I remember seeing Megadeth's Peace Cells and some other bands I listened to being shown in that. And that really made me think, oh, this does appeal to me. This is for me.
Is there a message that may be too loud for us to hear?
And just like Dungeons & Dragons, there was this whole satanic panic thing.
The role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons debuted in 1974. It became a hit with many adolescents, but critics claimed it was an invitation to devil worship.
Was metal evil? Was it satanic? Was it influencing our kids? Now the difference is, I've been playing D&D since I was about 8 years old. Even at that point, I knew it had nothing to do with Satanism. But with metal, I couldn't quite make the distinction, and I wasn't sure. And the reason is, there was no internet. These musicians were larger than life. There was really no way to figure out what kind of people they were. So the only thing you had was the lyrics. Occasionally you might read a magazine article, or they might show up on Headbangers Ball at the time. So as ridiculous as it sounds to you guys back then, I would look at Overkill trying to figure out, do these guys worship Satan? Are they killing babies in the backyard? I had no idea. I pretty much figured they were not. And some of it I could kind of figure, like Slayer, I thought, I think it's a gimmick. And then there was bands like Deicide, my friends and I were like, oh yeah, they're definitely eating the innards of the homeless in the back alley. Normies, and I hate that term because it's really condescending, but there was a very clear line between people who listened to metal and people who didn't back then. So unlike now, normies would freak out if they heard anything even close to thrash or death metal because they had never been really exposed to it. And I would always get, oh, that's not music. There's no melody in there. And even at that age, it made me think that's pretty weird to say because if I play this, you guys all know what that is. And if that was just noise and there was no melody, you would not be able to identify it. Even at that age, I knew that was kind of wrong for people to label it as being noise or having no melody. Didn't make any sense to me. I want to say the time was 1993. We were building a float for a senior prom. We got together at someone's house. We're working on this float and there was a boombox there. People were playing music. So naturally, I kind of took it over and just slid Overkill's horoscope in there. And I want to say within half of a song, I had a few girls run up going, "What?
Oh, this is disgusting."
It was like I threw acid on their face. That was a very normal reaction back then. They took it out quickly. The math teacher, I remember, started looking through the lyrics of Coma saying, "Sleeping with a time bomb, rumble in my dreams." And he goes on this rant to say, in poetry, in order to convey meaning, you have to have the correct prose. And I'm like, I don't care. I don't even listen to the lyrics anyway, unless it's suicidal tendencies or lawnmower death. Okay, so the next part, I have to be a bit careful when I talk about this. Mostly back then, it was guys listening to metal. Of course, there were some girls, but mostly guys were listening to metal back then. If you were a guy, if you wanted a girlfriend back then, the chances of her liking metal were almost non-existent. Unless she was what they called a burnout. And man, I haven't said that word in decades, because I don't think there are burnouts anymore, are they? Do you guys know what that is? If you're my age, you know what it is, but I haven't heard that term, and I don't think that exists anymore. It's kind of a stereotype. Look it up. I'm not going to go into it. But that was not really my desired stereotype, was a burnout. I kind of wanted a, normal girl to like metal, which was unheard of. And nowadays, I think the generations now, whether it's millennials, Gen Z, it's not like that anymore. I mean, the girl next door to you, which looks completely normal, could have went to an Infant Annihilator concert the night before and you wouldn't even know it. And that's a cool thing about generations like, Gen Z and millennials, way more open-minded than Gen Xers were back then. Speaking of not being open-minded and gatekeeping, I have a story to tell that I really regret from my sophomore year of high school. In the end, it worked out, but it's really cringy, embarrassing. Here it goes. At that time, I was like, thrash and death metal is everything. If you play anything less than that, you are a weak poser. I had this very Paul Bailoff mindset back then.
What do you guys do with posers? The places don't know that you kill posers.
In my art class, I see a kid bending over, picking something up. He had an AC/DC t-shirt on. Walk up to him and I'm like, what the hell is that? He's like, what the hell is what? And I said, that band you're wearing, what a weak band. And he got upset, turned around, got in my face. I got in his face. And we were about to fight over this. This is so ridiculous. But that's how it was back then. Because back then, my mindset was, it was like thrash and death metal and anything more extreme. Anything less than that was in a different category. I didn't necessarily think AC/DC was like glam or anything like that, but I pushed everything rock into a certain category and despised it. So we almost got in a fight. It didn't happen. I don't remember what happened from that point, but found out he was a drummer. We ended up start playing together, and he opened up a whole new world to me. So before that, I had not really heard Maiden, Dio, Ozzy, all the kind of like regular metal stuff, because if it wasn't thrash, I wasn't into it. And then I realized, oh, this stuff is not the same as glam. It's a different level. It's closer to thrash, actually. And I became a pretty big fan of it. I really owe that drummer a lot. Wish I could tell him that. But this was the mentality back there. I mean, for me, I liked thrash. I liked death metal. Some of my friends liked that too. But there were plenty of people who liked thrash, could not stand death metal because of the vocals. They said, oh, that's kind of garbage. And they looked down on it. And then I had heard people who were really intensely into death metal thought thrash was kind of pop to them. They thought it was too weak. Kind of the same mentality I had about the regular heavy metal. So you had all these different people and all these different factions. It was almost like a gang war, but no one ever fought each other. And back then, I don't think I ever met anyone that could listen from glam all the way to death metal, the whole range of the spectrum there. Nowadays on Twitter, you see people like that all the time. I'm pretty sure I got some more stories rolling around up here, so if you want to hear some more, please let me know.